All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling a topic that's always generating buzz, the alpha male.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a loaded term.
We've got a ton of articles here ready to dissect everything about this personality type, from those classic traits to the controversies and how it all fits in today's world.
It's interesting how we've taken this idea from like the animal world and just kind of dropped it into our everyday language.
Yeah, for sure.
We use alpha to describe certain men, but there's a whole layer of is it evolutionary psychology? I mean, do these labels really hold up when you think about how complex human behavior actually is?
Exactly. And I'm really hoping these articles dig into the science behind it all.
Right.
But before we get too deep, let's break it down. What even is an alpha male? Where does this concept come from in the first place?
So it all started with observations of animal hierarchies,
Okay.
particularly in wolves. Researchers noticed that the alpha was usually the strongest, most assertive male, leading the pack. But when you try to apply that to humans, well, it gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah, because we're not exactly roaming around in packs competing for that top spot.
Well, maybe metaphorically.
Right.
I mean, when we talk about alpha males today, it's more about a certain set of personality traits and how they act,
Okay.
like being assertive, making decisions quickly, and often they just naturally fall into leadership roles.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating to see how these traits play out in different parts of life. Like, did you know that Harvard Business Review found that something like 70% of senior executives
Whoa, really?
show those classic alpha characteristics?
70%. That's huge. I mean, it makes you wonder if there's really something to this whole alpha thing, at least when it comes to reaching a certain level of success.
That does make you think.
But one of the articles we have actually suggests that the modern alpha male might be evolving.
Hmm.
It says, men today are being encouraged to be knowledgeable about emotions and feelings, creating a new generation of strong, confident, and empathetic alpha male leaders.
That's a great point.
What do you think about that?
Well, it really speaks to this shift in how we view masculinity, right?
Yeah.
There's this growing recognition that real strength involves emotional intelligence and empathy, not just dominance or aggression. And these qualities are becoming more and more valued, even in those areas that have always been male-dominated.
Okay, so we've got this evolving picture of the alpha male, but let's dig into those specific traits that people associate with them.
Right, the classic alpha traits.
What makes them tick? I mean, our articles mention things like being assertive, natural leaders, ambitious, charismatic.
All the good stuff.
But I'm curious to go a little deeper than that. What's going on psychologically that drives these behaviors?
Now that's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
We could look at this through the lens of the big five personality traits.
Mm-hmm.
That model. Alpha males might score really high in conscientiousness, which is all about their drive and discipline,
Mm-hmm.
and also in extroversion, explaining why they're so socially confident and influential.
Yeah.
Oh, and let's not forget openness to experience. They're often the ones willing to take those risks, to push the boundaries. But it's super important to remember that these are just tendencies, not like a set-in-stone rule book.
Absolutely. Because we all have our own unique mix of traits, right? And these labels can oversimplify things. But there was one quote that really hit me hard. An alpha male's worst enemy is that of mediocrity and low expectations.
Wow.
It really gets at that drive to excel, to achieve. Do you think that's a defining characteristic?
I think you're right on the money there. Alpha males tend to set really high standards for themselves. They don't want to just blend in. They often have this strong internal locus of control.
Internal what?
It means they believe they have the power to shape their own destiny. And that mindset can be incredibly powerful. It pushes them to go after ambitious goals and overcome any challenges that get thrown their way.
So it's not just about being the loudest person in the room?
No, not at all.
There's this deeper belief in themselves and willingness to take action. But before we get into how these traits show up in different areas of life, I gotta ask, what about those other terms we hear all the time?
Like what?
Beta male, sigma male. Where do those fit in?
Ah, those are interesting ones, aren't they? Mostly because they've really taken off in online communities and pop culture.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They're not exactly official psychological terms, but they do reflect these different ideas of what masculinity can look like.
So how would you describe the typical beta and sigma compared to the alpha?
Well, beta male is often portrayed as more cooperative, less assertive than the alpha.
Right.
Maybe they value harmony and stability over competition and dominance.
And the sigma, he seems like kind of a mystery.
Exactly. Think of that lone wolf operating outside the whole traditional social hierarchy.
Right.
The sigma male might be seen as self-sufficient, independent, even a bit rebellious. They're forging their own path, not seeking validation from the group.
Interesting. So we've got these different archetypes, each with their own values and ways of navigating the world. But it's probably important not to get too hung up on these labels, right? Real life's way more complex.
Absolutely. These terms can be useful for understanding general personality trends, but they don't tell the whole story of who any individual really is.
Well said. So now that we've laid some groundwork, let's explore how these alpha male characteristics actually play out in the real world. I'm especially interested to see how those alpha traits translate to professional success and personal relationships.
Now that's where things get really interesting. I'm sure our sources have some insights to share on that.
Okay, so we've covered those core traits of the alpha male, but now I want to see how these characteristics actually play out in real life.
Yeah, let's get into some examples.
Our sources seem to really focus on two main areas: work and relationships. So let's start with the workplace. I mean, it's almost like the alpha's natural habitat, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you could say that.
Especially given that stat we talked about earlier, like 70% of senior executives displaying those classic alpha tendencies.
It's true. A lot of those alpha traits really lend themselves well to leadership positions.
Yeah.
They tend to be decisive, action-oriented, and really good at inspiring their teams.
Yeah.
But it's not just about barking orders.
No,
There's a strong element of vision, strategic thinking.
that makes sense. So they're not just about taking charge, but they're leading with a purpose,
Yeah,
a clear direction. Our sources also mention resilience as a key alpha trait.
for sure.
Like, they have this ability to handle setbacks and bounce back from
Right.
challenges.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be crucial in high-pressure work environments.
It's like they don't even flinch.
Absolutely, and I think this ties back to what we were talking about earlier,
What's that?
that internal locus of control.
Right, right.
They believe they have the power to influence outcomes.
So they don't just crumble when things get tough.
Nope, they see obstacles as opportunities for growth, for learning. It's a powerful mindset for any leader, honestly.
Powerful mindset. One source even suggests that alphas might have a higher tolerance for stress,
Oh, interesting.
like almost like they thrive in those challenging situations. But I mean, isn't there a risk of burnout with that constant drive to push forward?
Oh, definitely. That's where self-awareness and emotional intelligence become so important. A healthy alpha male recognizes that balance is key.
Yeah.
They know when to push, when to pull back.
Yeah.
They also understand that true leadership is about empowering others.
So it's not just about doing everything themselves,
No, not at all.
taking on the whole
It's
burden,
about building a strong team.
fostering collaboration.
Yeah.
But our sources also highlight the importance of effective communication, especially for leaders.
Communication, yeah.
It seems like alphas are often really clear, direct in expressing their ideas, which, I mean, that can be really beneficial in the workplace.
It can be, but there's a fine line between assertiveness and aggression. The key is to communicate with confidence, but also be respectful of others' perspectives.
Respect, yeah. Okay, so we've seen how these alpha traits can really contribute to success in the workplace, but what about personal relationships? I mean, do those same qualities that make someone a strong leader, do those also make them a great partner?
That's where it gets a little trickier.
Yeah.
Some of those alpha traits that are seen as like assets in the workplace, they can actually become stumbling blocks in romantic relationships.
What do you mean?
Well, that drive for dominance and control.
Oh, right.
If someone's used to calling the shots at work all the time, it can be really tough to shift gears and embrace that shared decision-making, that emotional vulnerability that are so essential for a healthy romantic partnership.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what does a healthy expression of alpha even look like in a relationship? I mean, our sources mention things like respect, support, open communication as being super important.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
It's about valuing your partner's opinions, their feelings, even if you don't always see eye to eye.
Even when you don't agree.
Exactly. It's about being present, attentive, offering support, and celebrating their achievements.
And one source even emphasizes the importance of encouraging your partner's growth, their independence,
That's key.
not trying to control them or limit them. It seems like there's a strong emphasis on equality, partnership in these sources, which, I mean, that feels like kind of a shift from that traditional alpha male stereotype, doesn't it?
It does, and I think it's a positive one. It's not about one person dominating or controlling the other.
No.
It's about two individuals coming together as equals.
Yeah.
each bringing their own strengths and vulnerabilities to the table.
That's a really great image. But one thing that surprised me was how some sources really stress the importance of vulnerability for alpha males, especially in relationships.
Vulnerability.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It seems kind of counterintuitive to that whole, strong, silent type persona we usually think of.
Yeah. Right. But it's incredibly important.
It is.
Oh, yeah. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable with your partner, to share your feelings, your fears, it fosters intimacy, connection. It's about letting go of that need to always be in control and allowing yourself to be fully seen,
Yeah.
to be loved for who you really are.
Ah, I never thought of it that way. But it makes sense.
Yeah.
True strength comes from embracing that vulnerability, not masking it.
Exactly.
But as these sources point out, there's another side to this whole alpha male concept,
Oh,
a darker side.
the darker side.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
we need to address.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the potential for these traits to manifest in unhealthy ways, leading to what people call, toxic masculinity.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a crucial part of this conversation. It's where those seemingly positive alpha traits can take a wrong turn.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize that this isn't about demonizing all men
Oh.
or saying that ambition and assertiveness are inherently bad things.
Right.
It's about understanding how those traits can be distorted and lead to harmful behaviors.
So how does that even happen? How do these positive traits morph into something toxic?
I think it often starts with these societal pressures and expectations,
About what?
about what it means to be a real man. Those messages can be subtle, like the pressure to be the breadwinner, to not show your emotions.
Oh, right.
And they can be really overt, like the way violence and aggression are glorified in some media.
Our sources talk about how those traditional alpha characteristics, when they're taken to an extreme, can actually contribute to a culture of dominance and control, where men feel pressured to always be in charge,
To win at all costs.
to never show any weakness.
Exactly. And this can show up in all sorts of problematic behaviors.
Like what?
Aggression, violence, emotional repression.
Right.
Even a reluctance to ask for help when they need it.
One source even goes as far as to define toxic masculinity as a specific set of cultural expectations that pressure men to behave in very specific ways, prioritizing toughness, power, and rejecting anything that's seen as feminine.
Wow. And it's important to recognize that this doesn't just harm women.
No.
It harms men too.
In what way?
It limits their emotional range, damages their relationships, and prevents them from truly expressing themselves.
It's almost like they're trapped.
It is. It's like a cage, trapping them in this narrow definition of what it means to be masculine.
But thankfully, these sources also highlight how the conversation around this is changing.
Oh, good.
Like, we're starting to challenge those harmful stereotypes and redefine what healthy masculinity looks like.
Absolutely. There's a growing movement to embrace a more nuanced, inclusive understanding of masculinity.
Yeah.
One that values empathy, vulnerability, connection, alongside strength and ambition.
That's really encouraging.
It is.
But with all these different perspectives out there, I'm really curious to hear what some of the leading voices in this field have to say. Our sources mention figures like Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, each with their own take on the whole alpha male concept.
Right.
What are some of the key takeaways from their work?
Well, it's fascinating to see how these figures, often coming from very different viewpoints, are grappling with this evolving definition of masculinity.
Okay.
Andrew Tate, for example.
Yeah.
He seems to embrace a more traditional, even extreme version of alpha masculinity, promoting ideas of dominance, control.
Right. I've heard of him.
But this perspective has been widely criticized for being harmful. I think it's really important to approach his views with caution.
I agree. It's crucial to be really discerning and critical when you're engaging with these ideas.
For sure.
What about Jordan Peterson? Our sources suggest he occupies a more nuanced space in this whole conversation.
Jordan Peterson, yeah, he's a complex figure.
Right.
And his views on masculinity have really sparked a lot of debate. He encourages men to embrace personal responsibility, discipline, and finding a sense of purpose. But he also cautions against those pitfalls of toxic masculinity.
He has that famous quote, attend carefully to your posture, quit drooping and hunching around, speak your mind, put your desires forward as if you had a right to them, at least the same right as others, walk tall and gaze forthrightly ahead, dare to be dangerous.
Yeah. It seems like he's all about embracing confidence and assertiveness, but in a healthy, constructive way.
Exactly. He emphasizes that true strength comes from taking ownership of your life, facing your fears, and contributing to the world in a meaningful way. But he also recognizes the dangers of aggression, dominance, suppressing emotions.
So it's not about rejecting those traditional alpha traits altogether. It's about channeling them in a positive direction.
Hmm.
What about Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman? His work seems to challenge the whole alpha-beta hierarchy, doesn't it?
That's right.
Like throws it all out the window. He argues that those labels, they're overly simplistic and don't reflect just how complex human personality really is. He suggests that the most attractive men are those who cultivate a mix of assertiveness and kindness. Skills, genuine value.
So it's not about fitting into a specific mold.
Yeah,
It's about developing your unique strengths and becoming the best version of yourself.
exactly.
That's a message that I think resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. And it really speaks to how this whole conversation about masculinity is changing. It's not about conforming to rigid stereotypes.
No.
It's about embracing your individuality, expressing your masculinity in a way that feels authentic to you.
Okay, so we've explored all these nuances of the alpha male concept.
A lot of nuances.
From those classic traits to all the controversies and those evolving perspectives from these thought leaders. But now I'm curious to get practical.
Practical.
Yeah, like what advice do our sources offer for men who identify with those alpha tendencies,
Right.
but they want to avoid those pitfalls of toxic masculinity?
Avoid the negative side.
Yeah, how can they navigate the complexities of work, relationships, and personal growth in a healthy and balanced way?
That's a great question, and I think our sources do offer some really valuable insights.
Yeah.
They emphasize the importance of emotional intelligence, respect, vulnerability,
Yeah.
and a willingness to really challenge those outdated notions of what it means to be a man.
I'm really eager to dive into those practical tips
Yeah, me too.
and explore how men can embody a healthier, more fulfilling version of masculinity. So we've really covered a lot of ground on this whole alpha male thing, haven't we?
We have.
From like its roots in animal behavior to how these traits can show up in our modern world, in the workplace and relationships.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see how those traditional ideas about masculinity are being challenged
Yeah.
with more emphasis on emotional intelligence and vulnerability.
Mhm.
Like, those are crucial parts of being a well-rounded man.
I have to say, I'm definitely seeing this whole alpha thing differently now. It's not just about dominance or aggression.
No, it's not.
It's about finding that balance between strength and sensitivity, ambition and connection.
Exactly. And it seems like our sources have some practical advice for men who want to develop those alpha traits
Mhm.
in a healthy way. What really stood out to you?
One thing that really stuck with me was the emphasis on developing emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence, yeah, that's huge.
And it's not just about, being in touch with your own emotions.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about understanding and responding to the emotions of others.
That's so important, especially in relationships. Being able to really empathize with your partner, to listen and understand their perspective. I mean, that's essential for building a strong connection that lasts.
Yeah, and it's not just about romantic relationships, is it?
No, not at all.
Emotional intelligence is valuable in every part of life.
Absolutely.
Navigating those tricky workplace dynamics, building friendships, even just understanding yourself better.
For men who grew up with that boys don't cry kind of message, developing emotional intelligence can be a game changer.
It can be.
It allows them to feel a wider range of emotions and express themselves in a more authentic way.
Our sources also talked a lot about the importance of respect.
Respect, for sure.
Respect for yourself and for others. It seems like a pretty fundamental part of a healthy approach to masculinity.
It is. Respecting yourself means setting boundaries, knowing your worth, and not settling for anything less.
Right?
And respecting others means valuing their opinions, even when you don't agree, and treating them with kindness and empathy.
One source even said that a true alpha male leads with respect.
Interesting.
Not with dominance or control. They practice what's called servant leadership,
Servant leadership.
focusing on the needs of others, empowering those around them.
That's powerful. It really turns that whole traditional alpha male idea on its head.
It does.
It says that true strength comes from service, from collaboration, not just from asserting your own power over others.
And it seems like there's a big emphasis on having a growth mindset, too.
A growth mindset, what's that?
It's this idea of like seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow instead of as threats or setbacks.
Right, right. Instead of getting discouraged, you see it as a chance to learn.
Exactly. A growth mindset means you can see failure not as a weakness, but as a chance to learn something valuable.
Makes sense.
It's about always trying to improve yourself, to learn new things and become the best version of you.
I like that. Always improving. And I think it ties back to that ambition we were talking about.
It
It's
does.
not just about success for your ego, it's about the journey of growth and self-discovery.
Exactly. And that journey often means pushing yourself, taking risks, being willing to learn from your mistakes. But maybe the most surprising advice,
What?
and maybe the most difficult for men who see themselves as having these alpha traits, is to embrace vulnerability.
Vulnerability. That goes against the whole image of that, stoic, unemotional alpha male.
It does. But our sources say it's really crucial for building real connections and living a fulfilling life.
Hmm. So how do they explain that?
Well, one even suggests that vulnerability is like the key to unlocking deeper intimacy in relationships.
Oh, interesting.
It's about letting go of that need to always appear strong and in control.
To lay your guard down.
Yeah, and allowing yourself to be seen for who you really are, even the messy parts.
That can be really scary, can it?
It can be. To be vulnerable, to open yourself up to maybe getting hurt or rejected.
It takes a lot of courage to do that.
It does, but it's so worth it. Because when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you open yourself up to deeper connections, more empathy, and a richer life. And I think that's really what this whole conversation about the alpha male is all about.
What do you mean?
It's not about fitting into some rigid stereotype or trying to live up to outdated ideas of masculinity. It's about finding that healthy balance in expressing your own unique strengths and, embracing all the different parts of being human.
I love that. It's about recognizing that true strength comes from a mix of things. Assertiveness and compassion. Ambition and connection. Resilience and vulnerability.
And it's about building a world where men feel empowered to just be themselves, their full, authentic selves, without being limited by stereotypes or expectations.
That's a powerful vision.
It is, and I think it's one we can all work towards.
For sure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. If those old ideas of the alpha male are changing, what does healthy, positive masculinity look like to you? How can you live those qualities in your own life and inspire others to do the same? Thanks for joining us on this exploration, and we'll see you next time.